Warm welcome to everyone to today's webinar on the fascinating theme Statistics for Social Sciences and Humanities. Should we use normal math or formal math? I would like to invite Vice Chancellor, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Professor Jagdish Kumarji, to say a few words.
Thank you, Shanalika. Welcome, Professor Raju and my colleagues and students, participants in this webinar. Today, we have a very interesting topic for discussion by Professor Raju, statistics for social scientists. But to be an expert in statistics, one has to be well grounded in mathematics also. They need to know algebra and probability theory, real analysis and optimization theory, and so on. One beauty with mathematics I find, because I often use mathematics in my profession as a professor of electrical engineering, is that mathematics is not amenable for interpretation. We can precisely describe the physical reality that we experience using beautiful equations. For example, if I say 1 + 1 is equal to 2, there is no interpretation for it. It is 2, period. But if somebody says this flower is red, well, that is, it can be interpreted. It could be light red, it could be dark red. But irrespective of whether something is interpretable or not, there is a common fear of mathematics among the people who work either in STEM area or in social sciences. And this fear of mathematics, what makes people nervous in manipulating numbers and finding solutions. Let's hope that today Professor Raju's lecture will dispel those kind of fears from the minds of people who are afraid to use mathematics in their profession. I very warmly welcome Professor Raju to deliver his lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that the share screen works. It's working all right. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, sir. We can see.
Thank you. I just want that confirmation because there is no feedback so easily. All right. So thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm going to really talk about the difficulty of understanding 1 + 1 = 2. I'm going to start with that at some point of time. But let me first of all start by paying my respects to Professor C.R. Rao. Professor C.R. Rao, as you know, is a very famous statistician in India. And he received the Padma Vibhushan and the US President's Medal. He turned 100 a few days ago. And I think that this is something, he's still academically active. It is something that one needs to take into account. He has a very impish sense of humor. For example, he talks of the Rao-Kramer inequality in height. Kramer was very tall, all right? And I recollect an incident in IIT Delhi that was long back in 1976. My guide was a student. The guide was the head of the department there. And we were just standing outside his residence. There was a party, and C.R. Rao was there, formally dressed with a suit and a tie. And we were just waiting to disperse. Very quiet those days. And suddenly he goes, testicle, 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 testicle. I said, the man has had too much to drink. He went on, testicle, testicle, testicle. I said, some screw has gone loose. And then he ended, statistical. So that is what the bus conductor used to say in when the bus reached Statistical Institute in Bonhugli. So I thought that I should pay homage to his sense of humor. Now let me start with the topic. So we know that statistics is very useful. Econometrics is a very stock example, won't go into that. Somebody mentioned history. And in history, you have Kosambi's pioneering application to statistics. this thing about punch mark points. There are, okay, I need to take this off. All right. So he worked on that. And in literature, for example, in the case of Shakespeare, you find something new and you want to know whether it is a part of Shakespeare or not. So you look at a frequency table. So this is a frequency table for Shakespeare. And you can examine. Now you can't be quite sure that it is, okay, my screen is here. I need to put this up. All right, you can't be sure whether this is actually written by Shakespeare, but you can analyze the frequencies used by other authors and you can arrive at some conclusion of whether it was not written by Shakespeare, or it was written by those authors or not written by those authors. So you have a frequency distribution and you can apply it. So this is also in the case of literature. Now, I won't go into all the details, but you get the basic idea. You do the frequency analysis and you are able to come to a conclusion. It's also applied in Indic studies. So, for example, statistical analysis of Kautilya's Arthashastra. And it suggests that multiple authors, and this was a book, whole book written by Truckman in 71. Now, I'm not saying you have to accept this conclusion, but if you wish to change it, you need to know statistics to be able to do it. And unfortunately, you see, statistics is something most people in social science, and there are lots of applications. You know, genetics, for example, Aryan-based theory. But the problem is that people don't understand statistics in social sciences and humanities. They are mathematically illiterate. I mean, take, for example, Madam Romila Thapar, who is a follower of Kosambi, but she confounded math and statistics. She wrote, Kosambi applied math to history. Now, I think there's a distinction between mathematics and statistics, and you don't confound the two, but people feel they have a right not to know that. Let me give another example from gender studies. So there was a women's group which called me to explain how to prove that drug trials are faked. They had a court case against some drug. So J.B.S. Haldane from my institute, he explained this long ago. How do you do it? He said, use a simple chi-square test. So here is the real data. This is babies born, male children born. This is the simulated version, and this is the imagined version. Now the imagined version is a problem, and the problem shows up in a simple chi-square test, which shows very large values of chi-square. If you look at the imagined version, as Haldane said, that people cannot fake things because the human mind is orderly and it cannot mimic the disorder of nature. So that was what he said. So this is what I told them, just use a chi-square test. They said, what is chi-square? So that little thing there, chi-square. So I said, if x has a normal distribution, x square is distributed as chi-square. They asked, what is a normal distribution? So I said, simply use the exponential and exponential function, and you have the normal density. And I said, what is an exponential function? Now at this stage I despaired, because you have to start from there. How are you going to explain what exactly has to be done? All right, but this exponential function, ignorance of this exponential function is not limited to women's groups. It applies also, to lots of other places, to science and engineering students. Last year I gave a talk on Indian calculus in Pune University. And I asked, what is the derivative of e raised to x? A very simple question, simplest question in calculus. So everybody answered, no, everybody shouts e raised to x. What is there in it? Then the next question is, what is e raised to x? So only 2-3 hands go up. What's e raised to x? It's an infinite series. So 1 plus x squared by 2 factorial and so on. Third question, how do you add an infinity of terms? Whole hall is silent. So this is what happened. Now you say Pune University, all right, State University, maybe some problem, but similar thing happened in MIT. MIT is the top thing in the world. So I asked a question about formal real numbers. The formal real numbers are infinite sums. For example, if you have square root of 2, it will be 1.414, etc., etc. So I asked them, what is the real number? Everybody was silent. And now there's a video of this in MIT. The video was taken. So maybe you take a look at this video. I'm just showing it to give you the Just search for CK Raju MIT video. It's taking too long. Let me go back. All right, so I can switch off this YouTube. So the whole hall was silent. I'm just showing this visual proof that in MIT, in a whole hall, nobody was confident enough to define a real number. Actually, they are very smart, because they knew that there is going to be a further question and a further question and a further question. Because if you answer about real numbers, there's going to be a question about the metaphysics of set theory, about axiomatic set theory, which is the metaphysics of infinity, which is needed, on which the theory of real numbers depends. So I tried this out in the University of Cape Town in 2017. So this is my Cape Town challenge. And Cape Town challenge is prove 1 + 1 = 2 in formal real numbers, not natural numbers. Prove 1 + 1 = 2 and do this from first principles in the manner of the 378 proof of 1 + 1 = 2, 378-page proof by Russell and Whitehead. So this is the 378-page proof. I don't know whether you can understand anything on this page 378. This is how I once used to teach formal mathematics. It should not involve a word of English. And it can be very confusing. So this is 378 pages, but this is an easy thing because this is for cardinals. I am asking for real numbers. And you must not assume any result from axiomatic set theory. You develop the entire axiomatic set theory that you need. This is a problem. Let's try it in JNU, for example. You have Madam Minati Panda, who is a professor of mathematics education, or take Dhruv Raina, who has a PhD in history and philosophy of math. I'm offering a prize of 10 lakhs to prove 1 + 1 = 2 according to my Cape Town challenge. If the answer, I get the answer tomorrow. Now, of course, you might say that's not enough time. All right, take 1 week, I reduce the price to 1 lakh. All right, and of course, since I'm serious about it, there are some caveats. What's the caveat? You can put your name on anybody's writing, so that's not allowed. You will be expected to publicly explain what you claim to have written. Just 1 + 1 = 2. If you can't do it, no problem. Just make a full and frank disclosure. Hang a notice outside your door, Professor of Mathematics Education does not know why 1 + 1 = 2. I don't mind, people should know. So the problem is not limited to just 1 + 1 = 2. Of course, this is just the starting point. I was taught that the starting point of statistics is let omega P be a standard Borel probability space. Omega is a topological space, B is a Borel sigma algebra, P is a probability measure on it. So just to begin statistics, you should know topology, you should know measure theory, you should know the Lebesgue integral, which most people don't know. It is too tough for them. And so the problem is that how do we resolve this issue? And this is just the beginning, right? It's not the end. If you go to advanced topics, you will get into stochastic process, you'll get into Wiener measure, you'll get into stochastic integral, Ito integral, and so on. And this is too tough even for students of IIT. Some students of IIT came to me, they were doing MStat, I think, in econometrics in ISI, and they said, why do we want all this formal mathematics? And in fact, even artificial intelligence. The people just use Google TensorFlow without understanding what is happening, and they muck things up. So it's true also it's a problem for people in finance and so on. So a simple point I'm making is that statistics is very useful in social science and humanities, but in its present form, it is too difficult for people from social sciences and humanities to understand it. So is there a remedy? That's the question that I try to address. And my answer is that these difficulties all arise from the use of formal math. So what is this formal math? I think we need to explain that. Why does this thing keep coming up about participants? Somebody is entering the room, exiting the room, and this is mucking up my screen. So why is 1 + 1 = 2 so difficult? Because we use formal math. I showed you, if you do 1 + 1 = 2 in normal math, that's kindergarten stuff. You know, you have 1 orange + 1 orange = 2 orange. There's no problem at all. So any child can understand it. That is because normal math accepts empirical proofs. Formal math prohibits empirical proofs. Now, if you prohibit that empirical proof, it makes even 1 + 1 = 2 very complicated. And that is why I've issued the challenge to prove just 1 + 1 = 2. And I think I showed you the thing about Bertrand Russell already, why you need 378 pages to prove it in cardinals. Forget about real numbers. And the problem is that one doesn't mean just one thing. In formal mathematics, it can mean many things. So one as a cardinal is not the same thing as one as an integer, is not the same thing as one as a rational number, is not the same thing as one as a real number. They are different entities. They may have some similar behavior, but they are different entities, distinct entities. So answering my Cape Town challenge may require perhaps 1,000 pages. But now the question is, you do something, what is its practical value? Nothing. You don't have no value in a grocer's shop, no value in calculating rocket trajectories. This is the example that people give. So I will perhaps demonstrate that. I do ballistics with air resistance in my course on calculus without limits. So if I have some time at the end, I will demonstrate that. But I was a formal mathematician before I joined CDAC, and I worked on the Indian Space Research Program. And this was one of the reasons why I turned away from formal math. Because, I had to implement all that stuff on the supercomputer. And formal math adds huge difficulty, but no practical value. That is the point I want to emphasize. The question is, why prohibit facts? And the answer is that the church gains. Who gains? We don't gain. Science does not gain. Science uses empirical facts. The facts are contrary to church dogmas. And during the Crusades, the church adopted its theology of reason from the Islamic theology of reason in order to persuade Muslims. They turned into theology of reason, Aquinas and the schoolmen. And for this theology, the church invented reasoning without facts. See, facts are contrary. Reasoning by itself is not. So Aquinas uses reason to prove that how many angels can fit on a pin. Angels don't exist, so facts are not involved. You can say anything you like. But then it glorified this kind of math as superior. And that's the issue, that you are doing things without that. And this false history, which is church history, is still in our school text. Our 9th standard school text, 6th standard school text, 9th standard school text talks about Euclid. There is no NCERT, has no proof. So it fraudulently or attributes the origin of such reasoning to some non-existent Greeks like Euclid. And we uncritically accepted that. And today there is no evidence, but we say you have to do it because the West accepts it. Therefore, we must accept it. That's what NCERT told me in writing. So this was colonial education. When colonial education came, it was 100% church education because all these big universities as well, Oxford, Cambridge, Paris, they were all owned by the church, set up by the church and owned by it. Now, in contrast to this, every philosophical system in India, without exception, accepts Pratyaksh Praman, accepts empirical proof. But this is declared inferior without any debate. I mean, maybe it is. Let's at least have a debate. There is no debate, just inferior. Somebody said so, you believe it. Why should I believe it? All science is based on Pratyaksh Praman, is based on the empirical. So why do you say that mathematics without the empirical is something superior? Right? So this needs to be, at least we need to have a debate, but there is no debate. And our professors of mathematics who cannot explain why 1 + 1 = 2 cannot critically examine the Western philosophy of mathematics. They hope to earn money from the West, they seek patronage, and they are loyal to the West. Okay, so much about mathematics, but statistics is about empirical data. I showed you some tables and so on, how Shakespeare used this and so on. So why should statistics use formal math, which prohibits the empirical? In fact, normal math, which accepts the empirical, is prima facie more suitable. Secondly, statistics is about risk, about uncertainty. It is fallible. No, you speak of a 95% confidence level or maybe 5 sigma level, but it's not 100%. Even if it is 100%, it's only almost sure. Probability 1 is only almost sure, never certain. So what's the distinction? Now let me go into it a little bit more. So normal math accepts the empirical. For example, if you say Aryabhat Ganit 13, he will talk about measuring verticality by means of a plumb line. Or it relates to the real world, like statistics. It accepts inexactitude. And this is very much everywhere. For example, in the Shulba Sutra, you'll find Savishesh, you will find Sanitya, so Sa Avishesh with an Avshesh. All right, you'll find Asanna in Aryabhat and so on. And that's exactly the case in statistics. It accepts fallibility, like science and statistics. So for example, Aryabhat's followers, according to Bhaskar, they point out that the Pythagorean theorem fails on the curved surface of the earth. If you try to draw a triangle on the curved surface of the earth, then you're not going to get the Pythagorean theorem. It's at best approximately true. But this was pointed out in the 7th century. We still don't teach it properly. Anyway, I'm not discussing Pythagorean theorem. Point is that formal math, in contrast, prohibits temperature. Hence, it relates to a fantasy world, not a real world. If you're talking of real numbers, they will say Vastavik Sankhya, but it is Gair Vastavik Sankhya, actually, because they are not real. Then it talks of exactitude. So, for example, square root of 2, you'll get an exact value. It's called Sarvishesh. So that's true only in a fantasy world, that exactitude. So it requires a metaphysics of infinity. And it accepts the superstition of infallibility of deduction. How can anything be infallible? Human beings are innately fallible. Anything you do, and deduction is more fallible. I have a paper on it, on decolonizing mathematics. You could take a look at that. I'll give you the reference. So the question is, normal mathematics is more suited to statistics. It fits the same kinds of things. So why do we use, how did these two things get combined, formal math and statistics? And my assertion is that history provides an answer. That probability and statistics, like calculus, originated in India as normal math, as Ganit. They were stolen by Europeans along with calculus in the 16th century. But Europeans made mistakes in understanding this imported knowledge. And that is my epistemic test, that those who copy, they make mistakes. Like students who copy in an exam, they cheat in an exam, they turn in identical answer sheets. How do? You interrogate them. So this is true for students in an exam. It's also true for glorified figures in history like Newton. All right, but it will take a lot of time to explain what happened, what mistakes they made. So I will only give you some simple example. I want to finish in, say, about 45 minutes or 50 minutes or something like that. So simple example of failure to understand is that the West repeatedly imported Indian arithmetic, but failed to understand it. Simple arithmetic, we are talking about school arithmetic, multiplying, dividing, adding, stuff like that. So you have Gerbert's abacus. This happened in the 10th century, from 976 or thereabouts. This is the first so-called Arabic numerals. So the point is that he understood the place value system. As you can see, this is 4019. So a blank space is taken to mean 0. Understood that. So the 2 blank spaces, 2 zeros. Understood that. But the very fact that he made an abacus is something meant for Roman numerals. It's not meant for the Indian case. In India, we had algorithms, comes from the name of Al-Khwarizmi's Hasab al-Hind, who translated it, and this was the thing which went to Europe. So the point is, this arithmetic was efficient. It's not just about representing, it's not just about place value system. You are able to do arithmetic efficiently. That point has not been made sufficiently well in India, but the Florentine merchants understood it. So Florentine merchants, again, because they understood that you get comparative advantage in commerce because of efficient arithmetic. So they imported it, Fibonacci's Liber Abaci. But then, once it started spreading, the Florentines are very confused. What is the 0? It has no value in itself. It goes on adding any amount of value to others. And they passed a law against 0 that if you write something in these strange Arabic numerals, you must also write it in words. And this difficulty persisted until the 16th century. Let me give a second order example of the failure to understand. Not only was the calculus stolen from India, my thesis that the calculus was stolen was also stolen by Britishers. The serial plagiarism, we have Judge Givergis Joseph is crest of the peacock, serially plagiarized my work right for the last 20 years. So this was the first case which became public. This was came as a headline, and Exeter University passed some strictures. Eventually they threw out. I'm giving you, this is available at ckraju.net/Joseph. You can find it. Then there was a second case. All newspapers in India carried it on their front page. And if you can you see this? Only Hindustan Times published a retraction. All right, that this is false, this did not happen, that I've already done work on it, I've produced a book, and so on. It was a small, it's a retraction is a big thing, but it did it. But nobody really understood it till now. Nobody, well, some people have, but not many people. So the point is that the Joseph claimed credit, he did not understand. Point I'm making is that those who steal don't understand. Like students in a exam, like Newton, like lots of other cases. So because he did not understand, he made many mistakes, foolish mistakes. I'll describe only one. So one of my early papers was this Hawaii paper. It is on the alternative epistemology of the calculus in the Yukti Bhasha, long back 2000. All right. So it is available publicly. You can take it up. Point is that when I was doing this, I did not understand. This was 20 years ago. I started around 97. So I did not understand how Indians sum the infinite series. So Neil Kant did sum the infinite geometric series. So you can see, for example, here is his comment on in Aryabhatiya Bhashya, Ganit 17. So he summed it and the formula is the same and it's a correct formula. The point is, how did he sum it? It had no limits. So I didn't understand at that time. Now, since I didn't understand, but I knew that computers do calculus differently. They use floating point numbers, not real numbers. And I was teaching floating point numbers to computer science students at that time. So I explained this. I said floating point numbers is another way to do calculus. Now, Joseph and Almeida, they stole my point without understanding and wrote in a paper in Race and Class. The Kerala mathematicians employed floating point numbers to understand the notion of infinitesimal and derive infinite series. How can you use floating point numbers? It's complete nonsense. It's complete nonsense. So floating point numbers, of course, system invented for computers. But if you're doing by hand, you don't need to use such things. You can always change things. It's only for a machine. And a digital machine, all right. So they have nothing to do with infinities and infinitesimals, but they wrote such things. So the point I'm again making is, if you steal, copy, you make a mistake. And that mistake creates a problem. But what this guy said, very shameless, as you can see, 2-3 times he has done it. He said, he pointed out two things. He's a trained lawyer. He said British law and US law allows Christians to steal knowledge, land from non-Christians. When you say Vasco da Gama discovered India, that discovery means something. So here is this doctrine of Christian discovery. And this is the reference to the US Supreme Court judgment, Johnson and Graham's Lessee, 1823, which has never been withdrawn. Like the doctrine of Christian discovery has never been withdrawn, it stands. So they say whether Protestants or Roman Catholics doesn't matter. The judge very clearly interpreted it and explained it. All right. So you're allowed to steal. So he said, I'll be allowed to steal and I'll get away with it. And he said about Indians, you can tell any lie and they'll believe it. They will never examine the details. They will never check. They'll just go gaga. If some British has praised an Indian, master has praised the Indians, what more do we want? He said it bluntly. And that is what happened. That is exactly what happened. In 2007, you know, every Indian press went gaga, everybody carrying it on the front page. He copied my whole paper verbatim and made mistakes even there. So PTI said, preferred that unpublished paper because it came from Manchester University. It was my paper. So they didn't look at my Hawaii paper. They didn't look at my 500-page book on calculus transmission, right? They just refused to look at it. So they said, we want a bite. You don't give us a 500-page book. We can't read it. So it's a fat book, you know, you can, this is the book. It's that big. So they refused to read it. They just wanted the bite. So now the point is, only Hindustan Time published a retraction. I showed that to you already. The result is that no one will check the details even now. Hyderabad University calls this ignoramus for a conference on mathematics education. What are children going to do? So these are things given on my blog. You can take a look. Because our test of understanding is only Western endorsement. And now the colonized mind similarly glorifies what Newton did. Discovery of calculus. The discovery is in the sense of doctrine of Christian discovery. Because Newton claimed credit for the science series, and the science series is found in the Yukti Deepika. Here it is, and I can give you the whole thing, but I don't have time. If somebody wants to know, I can. It ends up with the science series. All right, it is not something which is very difficult to do. And similarly, the Leibniz series for pi. So that also is found in the Yukti Deepika, and again, you get the standard Leibniz series for pi. So we can't check this simple act of plagiarism. How are we going to uncover what Newton did? Or what Leibniz did? Newton was a deep thinker. He was not, some simple fraud. So you have to, therefore we think we have to ape the Western understanding of statistics. All right. So the key key point is that since Europeans stole calculus and probability, they didn't understand it. All right. They failed to understand it. And certain aspects of it, like infinite series, they didn't understand how to sum. They didn't understand the concept of probability. So they modified calculus and probability to fit in with their superstitions about formal math. That made math very complicated without adding any practical value. And so what is the solution? The remedy is to decolonize, and decolonization does not mean blind rejection of everything Western as is often caricatured. It means a critical rejection. This has been my stand. This is what was published in Malaysia. We had a big debate on it, 2013, no, much earlier, 2011. So it's a critical rejection. You accept what is good and reject what is bad. And at least reject the Western superstitions which are coming from the prolonged church hegemony in the West. So history repeats itself when people repeat the same mistakes. And we are repeating the same mistake by allowing the calculus transmission to be, thesis to be stolen, because the issue is not just mere glory, it is better understanding. So many people keep saying, oh, there is Pythagorean theorem in the Shubha Sutra, we did it first. But the response to it that is given by the West is that we did it better. So you need to have a better understanding. That is the critical issue, not chronology. And of course, that is also wrong. I have a paper on that, on Black Thoughts Matter, because this was in the context of South Africa. That's wrong, but even to contest it, you need understanding. And that is absent, because we only repeat, we only imitate. So we have not been able to contest this simple plagiarism in 20 years. How will we ever understand Newton's subtle mistake about calculus, what he did with time, how his physics failed, and what is the mistake about real numbers, which we teach from, because people are indoctrinated into it from class 11. So what is the Western mistake in understanding probability? Because probability is based on that real number. So let me try. So we have Indian origins of probability. So there are several articles, Probability in Ancient India, it's in the Handbook of Philosophy of Statistics. So you can get this paper. I'm not going to read it out. It's available online. There's an article on probability in the Springer Encyclopedia of Non-Western Mathematics, and there is my book on transmission of calculus, cultural foundations of mathematics, which I've already shown you. These are general references. So first thing is that probability and statistics originated in India as normal math or Ganit. Statistics relates to a game of dice. The archetypal example of probability. And the first account of the game of dice is in the Rig Veda. So it's in the Aksha Sukta of the Rig Veda. So here is the Aksha Sukta, and I will just read one line of it. Somasya mojav tasya maksho. There is pleasure like the som in the dice. So this is what is being said. There is a translation of it also. I think I can give you some idea of the translation. You know that everybody avoids a gambler. He stays away, he's separated from his wife. And the gambler wants to stay away from the gambling space, but it has a fatal attraction. It pulls him. The dice do not obey his wishes. They revolt. Sometimes he wins, sometimes he loses. When he wins, he is so happy, as if a son is born. When he loses, he's as if dead, and so on. And the bravest of the brave lose to these dice. A very poetic, interesting thing in Aksha Sukta. Anybody who lends him money doubts that he'll get it back. He arrives on a steed and departs at night with no clothes on his back. So, oh dice, I namaskar to your leader. That is the Aksha Sukta. Very interesting thing. When I pointed this out, you have Witzel from Harvard. He just lied brazenly about it. That Raju is using Wilson's translation. I have done my own translation. He should be able to read English. He said he talked of 6-phase dice. Now I talked of 5-phase dice. And it doesn't really matter how many faces it has, because the Vivita tree, I'll show you a picture, has 5 faces. It's mentioned in the Aksha Sukta. But this is the point I'm making, that if we are going to rely on the West, they lie brazenly. Because this paper was online. All I had to say in response, please download and check where you can find 6-phase dice, where you can find Wilson's translation. They just brazenly lie. This is Harvard, the top chap whom Narayan Murthy is paying so much money to do work on. So you can't trust Western historians, to be honest, even about easily checked facts. Don't imagine that it can be easily checked, therefore it is right. All right, I'm willing to lie about it. Then there is the Mahabharata, the Sabha Parva, I won't go into it. Shakuni wins the game by deceit. Now, the important thing here is that if you have deceit, then you have a fair game or an unbiased game. You have some concept of that unbiased game. Then, of course, there is Mahabharat 1 Parv, where there's the story of Nal and Damayanti. A very nice romantic story. They are separated, and Nal is disguised, takes up a job with Rituparna, who's king of Ayodhya, and Damayanti announces a Swayamvar. Oh, by the way, that's widow remarried in Mahabharata. So then they are dashing from Ayodhya to Vidarbha, and they stop near a Vibhitak tree, which is the same Vibhitak tree which is mentioned in the Akshasukta. And it has a 5-sided fruit, so you can see the fruit. I have a picture of that here. And this is used in some common Ayurvedic medicines like Triphala. It's one of the 3 fruits. So Rituparna shows off his knowledge. He says he counts 2095 fruits on that tree. And then Nal wants to get the knowledge of dice because he has lost his kingdom in the game of dice. And so he says, I'll wait and I will cut down and count. But then Rituparna gives him the knowledge and tells him that you just have to sample. Sampling is the easiest way to count the large number of fruits in a tree. So this is how Nal learns it. And then, of course, there are a whole lot of things. The mathematics of permutations and combinations is found in many ancient Indian texts, right from the time of Pingal, Chanda Sutra, Jain, Bhagavati Sutra, found in Shushrut, it's found in Varahamihir. And it is also in the common school text of Sridhar, for example. That you want to do, so you write down the numbers in reverse order, then write them down the straight order, then divide, and you get NCR values. All right. So the point is that Cochin-based Jesuits in the 16th century, they stole knowledge of a whole lot of stuff, but especially calculus and probability, along with astronomy texts. Why did they do that? Why were they interested? They had a college, still stands, for the sake of their navigational problem, because their wealth depended on overseas trade or piracy or whatever you call it. But for that, you need good navigation. To do navigation, you have to have trigonometric values, and these texts had values, so that it may look like this. This is Madhav's sine table. So this is not Sanskrit, it is just numbers. All right, and they give you the trigonometric values correct to the 3rd sexagesimal minute. So Kala, Vikala, Tatpara. And they are very accurate. So if you understand in decimal places, this is the level of accuracy that these tables have. So they wanted that because to determine your latitude, longitude, and so on, it's explained in my school text. And Loxford Rome, the special problem of Europeans. Accurate navigation was the biggest challenge, and it was, Royal Society and so on started on that basis from 15th to 18th century. So they discovered this, and they used the genocidal doctrine of Christian discovery, which I have already described. Then there were binomial coefficients and Pascal's triangle, which you use all the time. So binomial coefficients are found in Pingal's Chanda Sutra. Halayud explains Pascal's triangle, which is called Khandameru by Bhaskar II. Why am I mentioning it? Because Pascal was close to Fermat. Fermat in 1657 made a challenge problem. So it is to solve this equation, nx square plus 1 equal to y square for n equal to 61. That is the challenge. No European mathematician was able to solve it. This is in Uval's, his collected works, page 332. So it remained unsolved until the 18th century when Euler solved it. Of course, he had access to Indian text. But the point I'm making is, this was a solved exercise in Bhaskar's Bijganit. And how did Fermat get it? And the numbers that are involved are so large that it can't happen just by chance. Obviously, he had access to it. So there was a commentary on Bhaskar's text called Kriyakram Kari. And this was one of the things which was translated and imported into Europe in connection with the navigational problem. But the point again, I come back to it, that's a critical point, because Europeans stole. They failed to understand calculus and probability until the 20th century. They were struggling. Newton's fluxions are a laugh. And you had to have real numbers. When did real numbers come? They came after Dedekind, and when after set theory, formal set theory came in the 20th century. So they turned it into formal math. Let me give an example of how Europeans have failed to understand the concept of probability. What is probability? Right? This is a central question. If you are going to do statistics, you should have an understanding of it. What is probability? So if you toss a coin repeatedly, what you will get is the relative frequency. You will not get probability, because the relative frequency will go on changing. It's not a fixed number. It's not an exact number. It is only a near value, an asanna value. near to 1/2 for an unbiased coin. So Europeans could not, in the case of calculus, they could not explain what an infinite sum was, even in metaphysically. Descartes said it's beyond the human mind. Berkeley objected to what Newton did and so on. I've written about all that. So then they invented formal real numbers. I mean, real is a misleading term, unreal, but they're called real numbers. And limits. We need limits for calculus. But this technique, which was done for calculus, I won't go into what the problems are. It does not work for probability. I cannot define probability using limits. Why not? So you have the law of large numbers, whatever you take, weak law, strong law, doesn't matter. Relative frequency converges to probability, but only in a probabilistic sense. It is convergence in measure, convergence in probability. So all you can say is that after a large number of trials, the probability of deviations becomes small. So you cannot use limits to define probability because you're assuming probability to start with. Otherwise, you'll be committing the fallacy of begging the question. You assume probability, you can't use it to define probability. Then there are subjective probabilities. These days, Bayesianism is so very common and so on. So you can regard probability as a degree of subjective belief, all right? In this case, the probability is not defined over a sigma algebra and so on. It's defined on a Boolean algebra of propositions, ordinary propositions in the language. But see, quantum mechanics is probabilistic. A quantum probability, Einstein may have said God does not play dice, but God does play dice because quantum mechanics does hold. And those probabilities are objective. It's not a matter of subjective belief. The electron is here and there and also here and there. So they are objective, right? They are about the real world out there. And that quantum logic is non-Boolean. How did we arrive at the axioms? How did we assume it as Boolean? How did we know it's even a lattice? So joint probability distributions do not exist in quantum mechanics. That is the fundamental thing for canonically conjugate variables like, say, position and momentum. So this is quantum logic corresponds to a quasi-truth functional logic like the Buddhist logic of Chatushkoti or the Jain logic of Syadvad, discussed by Hardin. So this is discussed in my book, Time Towards a Consistent Theory. And this is the quantum logic and quasi-truth functional logic. And in 11 Pictures of Time, I have discussed the Buddhist Chatushkoti and the Jain Syadvad and so on, and what are their syllogisms. It's too long to go into here. Key point to summarize is that Karl Popper, he rightly argued that the frequentist interpretation of probability in terms of relative frequency is not valid. And the subjective interpretation of probability also fails because, see, after all, probability, if it is coming in quantum mechanics, you have nothing better. It's not lack of knowledge as Laplace thought it was. It's not an epistemic failure. It is the case. It is ontically true. So that lack of knowledge interpretation of probability is gone. It is actually the case. But then what alternative Popper offer is a propensity. That's pretty meaningless stuff. And of course, his solution, he thought he gave a solution to the problem of induction. The probabilities don't change by means of repeated trials. They do not enhance. They do not amplify. They are not ampliative. That was his term. But that is all right. If you take probability in a measure theoretic sense, it will not change. But in practice, you never have the probability. In practice, all you have is an estimate of the probability. You have a sample, you have an estimate. I perform an experiment 2 times, 3 times, 5 times, 10 times. I get an estimate. I never get the probability. And that estimate will go on changing. And the estimate can be ampliative. So many experiments fall and so many experiments against, things will change. So that can be ampliative. You always have only an estimate, not the probability. Probability is not real, as defined in terms of measure theory. Estimates are. So short summary is this, that the West has not understood the concept of probability. How does statistics work then? The point is you never use that omega BP in practice. Right? You're doing a table, you're calculating from the table, whatever thing you're doing, you're never going to use that because that's all infinite things. So this is a metaphysical imposition on statistics, on probability, which is not needed for anything in social science and humanities. But you need to understand what is happening. Because without, I mean, this was one way, there are other ways of understanding. So what's the remedy? So I think I am keeping my time, and let me just quickly outline the remedy. So I developed a decolonized course in statistics in Malaysia in 2013. So this was as per the stipulations of the Malaysian Qualifications Agency. So it is statistics for humanities and social sciences. It's a very long thing. What is the rationale and so on? How many lectures? This was you're using what you call trimester system. And so they have all these kinds of things, put it like this. And it's a long document. It's available publicly. You can take a look at it. Right? Week 1, what will you do? Week 2, what will you do? Etc. etc. So this is a course that was developed to give people an idea. And one of the features of this course was that instead of SPSS, the Statistical Package for Social Sciences, which is very expensive, because this university was meant for poor students. All students were poor. All students came for with a scholarship. And so what we taught them was go back and serve your community. So how will they get such an expensive package if it costs $35,000? It's all right for corporate, it doesn't matter. But so we use PSPP, which gives all the same facilities, but it is free and open source. So that was the other thing. And because students need to know what is normal distribution, what is chi-square, what is exponential, how do you teach that? You teach that by using, you have a prerequisite core course in decolonized calculus. That was the assumption. So such a course in calculus was developed, and it has been tried out in lots of universities. Basically uses the calculus as it developed in India. There are 3 features. First is it starts from Aryabhat's numerical method of solving ordinary differential equations, with which he obtained his sign values, which were precise to the first sexagesimal minute. Later on, what the Aryabhat school in Kerala did was to extend it to sexagesimal thirds. The procedure was the same. But this by itself is not enough. You say, what are you doing? Are you just doing some numerical analysis? No. Because there is a difference. You have Brahmagupta and his non-Archimedean arithmetic of polynomials. To understand polynomials, you'll understand that you have a non-Archimedean arithmetic, and you can find this, for example, in a book by Moyes or so on. So this is the interesting part, that Indians use this non-Archimedean arithmetic. Point of non-Archimedean arithmetic is that you have infinities and infinitesimals. So polynomials, as you know, were invented by Brahmagupta. We call them Avyakt Ganit. So yeah, ax plus b, it's a number which doesn't have a expressed value. Only when you give a value to x, it will have a value. Third thing is there's a philosophy of zeroism. I call it zeroism. It is like Shunyavad. Why I don't call it Shunyavad is that people keep talking, Nagarjuna said this, Nagarjuna said that. I had a big argument with this lady from IIT Kanpur. It went on for 2 hours. So I mean, point is I'm not interested in textual exegesis. I'm interested in a particular philosophy which helps you to do things, which helps you in a practical way. And so that is an acceptance of inexactitude. See, what Shunyavad does is that you keep changing. You are not the same person you were when you first came here. You've changed. Certain things have changed. Maybe you had some water, maybe this, that, physically, lots of things have changed. Mentally, they have changed. So it's an acceptance of inexactitude. We still speak of you as one person. Likewise, you can work with numbers which are approximately the same. You don't have to have exactitude. So this was later developed by the Aryabhat school in Kerala to some infinite series and so on. The sum, I give you the formula for the sum, they got it correct, and that is how they sum them without limits. Because if you have Archimedean, non-Archimedean arithmetic, you will not have limits. You will not have unique limits in any case. So you have to discard infinitesimal. So that is where the zeroism is used. So my course on calculus without limits teaches calculus that way, and it has been taught over the last 10 years in 3 countries. It was also tried out with students of social sciences and humanities. All right. So it was tried out in Kutch, Sarnath. So these were all students who had no background in mathematics. Even their school level thing was not quite certain. Then it was tried out in University of Science Malaysia with 4 groups, and that was the Apex University there. And one of the groups, well, there was a postgraduate group in math, there was an applied math group, there was a pure math group, and there was a non-math group who had not taken advanced math in school. I don't have a photo for them. There was a report on this teaching. And it was tried out in Ambedkar University, Delhi. And this was quite some time back. Then it was tried out in CISC, Iran. These are also social science people. Then it was tried out in SGT University in Delhi. These are engineering students. Engineering students who did it, they are very happy. But yeah, so this has been tried out in so many places. So what is the advantage? say, okay, it has been done. So what advantage do I get by doing this? So let me give a very old example. It's a 25-year-old example. I developed this long back. So in finance, you encounter what are called non-normal and fact-tail distributions. Now, these are quite messy if you want to look at them. You see, normal distribution depends upon this central limit theorem that we were talking about. That is why, but if your mean does not exist, if your variance does not exist, then you have the weak law. If your mean also does not exist, then you have what are called stable distributions. And these distributions are described in terms of their characteristic function, which looks like this, which is quite messy. And these are called the alpha stable distributions. So they include normal, they include Cauchy, they include the classical Levy distributions. These are the fact-tail probabilities. What are these fact-tails? See, if you have a distribution of heights. Now, I don't know anybody is twice my height. Even Harold Kramer was maybe 6'7" or something. He was not twice my height. He was a little taller. But I do know somebody who has twice my income. And if you have a professor, you know somebody who has twice your income. That guy will know somebody who has twice his income, and so on. So it can go on like that. So that sort of thing will not happen with the normal distribution. It will happen with this kind of fact-tail distributions. So that is what is meant by fact-tails. And now when you have this, where you don't have a formula, then you are forced to do computation. So let me just give you a quick example so you can benefit. Point is, if you are going to do things numerically like that, you should do that from the beginning. Let me just give you a quick example of that. So this is a solver that I wrote long back. And now this is solving what are called stochastic differential equations driven by Levy motion. You can work with Brownian motion, which is easy. You can get something, but Levy motion, you have to compute. There is no formula. So this is the Levy distribution. As you can see, the tails are very thick.
Moral of the story is that normal math works even when formal math fails. This is contrary to the superstition that it is formal math which works.
So the conclusion is that decolonized statistics can help people in social science and humanity in acquiring new insights. Because you have all these tools available, but you have to understand, it's not just that you use tools. Like AI, people just use Google TensorFlow, and they don't know what is happening. So if I want, for example, Google has this, what you call the voice recognition software for Hindi. It used to do a good job. But now it recognizes if I say Vyavaharik, but then it applies AI and says it is Vyaparik, because Vyaparik is the more probable word. So you need to understand, otherwise you'll mess things up badly. But this course is easy to learn because you have decolonized calculus, and you have follow that with decolonized statistics, and then you use the tools. So you have to do it with understanding, not merely just a toolkit where you use things without understanding. That doesn't help. But you see, what colonial education teaches is blind trust in the West, blind imitation of the West. So they are unable to think critically about the West and not able to make a change. So I'm not sure if this change can be implemented. I have tried, and maybe people have to keep suffering. I don't know. So here there are more details. Thank you very much. I think I kept to my time of 50 minutes. Yeah, I can stop sharing. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Raju. That was quite a talk. You covered so much ground, from the historical till the contemporary, from science to politics and philosophy. That was really riveting. I think the greatest takeaway from your talk was, of course, the emphatic case you make for a continuing need for decolonization of syllabi and of disciplines, in fact, across the world, and especially in South Asia. I don't think anyone could disagree with that. On a different note, also, your starting appeal to make maths simpler rather than more difficult in whatever way that's possible is also very welcome. On behalf of everyone in the humanities, at least I can say that.